Hello listeners, and welcome to episode 2 of 50 Years of the Unofficial Countryside. This is a 4-part series about the Coal Valley Regional Park and its industrial history. As I mentioned in the first episode, the Coal Valley Regional Park is steeped in industrial heritage, such as quarrying, farming and agriculture, mills and brickmaking. These and other industries have shaped the landscape we are familiar with today, creating parks, nature reserves, lakes, rivers and canals, which have all made diverse environments not just for us to enjoy, but for the wildlife as well. This episode will explore the Upper Valley and some of the industrial history that has made up its landscape. The Upper Valley boundaries are from Rickmansworth to where the A40 crosses the park just below Denham. If anything shows evidence of the Coal Valley Regional Park's industrial heritage, which has shaped its landscape over the years, the quarry industry is a clear example. The lakes, which were created from abandoned quarry pits, have become an identifying feature of the Coal Valley Regional Park's landscape. Although there are lakes dotted throughout the park, the Upper Valley landscape is distinctive with its chain of lakes sprinkled between the Grand Union and the River Colne. Quarrying has been part of this area since the 1800s. The extracted materials vary throughout the park, although gravel extraction seems to be the most predominant. However, sand, clay, chalk and minerals have also been quarried over the years. In some cases, after the materials have been extracted and the quarry pits were no longer in use, they eventually filled with water and became the lakes that we know today. Here are some examples of lakes in the Upper Valley which were once quarries and have since been transformed into places of leisure and havens for wildlife. Bury Lake and Batchworth Lake are part of Rickmansworth Aquadrome, and like Stockers Lake, which is nearby, they were quarried for gravel in the 1920s and 30s. It is rumoured that the gravel from these pits was used to build the old Wembley Stadium. W.H. Walker and Brothers were a big part of the Rickmansworth Aquadrome, and Chris talks about the Walker Brothers' background.
They'd started off as digging the gravel out, and they decided that they needed specialist boats to get the gravel out. So they decided they'd build the boats themselves. So they built the boats themselves, and then other people came along and said, "That boat you've got for getting gravel out is excellent. Can you make us one?" So they became boat builders. In fact, became a big part of their business was building boats, both canal boats and specialist gravel boats. They built narrow boats called Ricky class boats. But they also built wide boats, and a particularly clever thing which was called a self-draining gravel barge, because the whole area is so wet, so when you're getting the gravel out you have to get it out with a dredger from under the water, and obviously it comes up water and gravel. So you dump it on this self-draining barge, and you don't want the thing to fill up with water, so the water drains off and it leaves the gravel on the barge, and then they take it on and tip it out.
Walker Brothers also ventured to create a water park from Bury Lake and Batchworth Lake. Chris explains how they prepared the lakes to make them usable for boats.
When you take the gravel out, you use these dredgers and you just scoop up the gravel, and you leave behind a bit of earth between each row of gravel you've taken out. So in order to make it suitable for boats to go round, you've got to dredge all these out. Done that at Batchworth Lake and Bury Lake, but they haven't done it at Stockers Lake. Stockers Lake is the bird sanctuary, and so it's still, which is why it's got all these lots of little islands left, because they didn't bother.
However, their boat building business prospered more than the park. Chris explains more.
By the end of the 20s, they realised they weren't making any money as a park, and they'd gone on to building more boats and making more of that business out of their business. So they sold it to a man called Coates, who was the London's motorboat speedway club, and he wanted to use the land for motorboat racing, and he called it the Aquadrome because there was a vogue at the time for calling things drones, like aerodrome and velodrome. This was an aquadrome, and he advertised boat racing, and there were classes of boat racing, both inboard and outboard motors, and speed championships.
Jane shares memories of the Aquadrome in the 1960s.
If you go to Uxbridge Road and the Money Hill parade of shops, there's a shop called Decor Scene, which is for painting and that sort of thing, and Mum and Dad moved into the flat above that. In those days you could look out the back window across to the Aquadrome because the trees hadn't grown up and you could see all the lakes. You had a wonderful view there, and at the back of that area there were a load of allotments that went down to one of the tributaries of the River Colne. But I think that's where my love of river areas and habitats has come from.
Stockers Lake is now a nature reserve, and since the end of the gravel extraction, the old pit's filled with water and they've become a beautiful place for wildlife, especially birds. It is considered a bird watcher's paradise, but it wasn't always that way, and Chris recounts the movement of gravel at Stockers Lake.
They used to get, I suppose that's opposite Stockers, they got the gravel out from Stockers and from Batchworth and from Berry Lake by taking boats in along the short length of the canal into Stockers Lake itself and loading up with gravel and taking it out. And so they built an area opposite Stockers House. They widened the canal so the boats could turn. It's now used as a winding hole for turning boats round. But if you go below Stockers Lock and turn left looking towards Stockers Farm, there's an area where the canal's been cut out. It's wider on the other side. And that was so that they could turn boats round, 72-foot boats round, and take them in through a lock into Stockers Lake to fill it up with gravel and take them out.
As we continue down the valley, we come to Broadwater Lake. This lake was created as the result of gravel and sand extraction from the 1960s and to the 1980s. The material was used to build Heathrow Airport and the M25. Since the completion of the extraction, it has become a haven for wildlife and birds. If fresh air, communing with nature, and exercise is called for, you can also enjoy a walk along the western edge of the lake, or maybe a bit of sailing. Further down the valley, we come to the lake where HOAC, Hillingdon Outdoor Activities Centre, is situated. It too has a quarrying history, and Shirley remembers sailing at HOAC in the 1980s.
I learned to sail a catamaran there, and they used to have a sailing club for people with disabilities, and I used to go down there and sail a catamaran, and that was fun. And then they put us in this little dinghy type thing with a sail. It wasn't a yacht. I think it had 2 seats in it, but a lot of the time I used to go out on my own. But I didn't like that because I used to get stuck in the wind would take me into the bushes, and then the sails would get caught up in the bushes and they'd have to come and rescue me. Sit in the bushes for ages.
We come to the Fraser Valley Local Nature Reserve and Denham Lock Woods. These lakes are next to the Grand Union Canal. The land was once grazing marsh and floodplain. The gravel extraction was part of the Denham quarries, and the unused pits naturally filled in with water and created a series of lakes. Another aspect of the Coal Valley Regional Park's industrial heritage is the Grand Union Canal. Imagine years ago workhorses pulling barge boats laden with cargo along the canal towpath towards their many destinations. It was used to transport merchandise and materials, especially heavy loads such as bricks, timber and gravel, more easily and efficiently between London and Birmingham when land passage was more challenging. Factories and mills such as Batchworth Mill established themselves near the Grand Junction Canal to take advantage of its transport benefits. The Grand Junction Canal passes through the top of the Coal Valley Regional Park, past Rickmansworth, and continues south before bending off eastward between Useley and West Drayton, making its way into London. The Grand Union was formed in 1929 from an amalgamation of various canals. Philip talks a bit about the Grand Union.
The first one, we could link the Midlands with London by water. I mean, it predated the railway by about 30 or 40 years. And of course, once the railway started, the canal went into decline. I suppose in the early 1800s it must have been very busy. Even before the war, I mean, there was quite a lot of traffic on the canal. I think what finished it was the Great Freeze of 1962-63. We had about 3 months of a freeze, it was a great freeze. And the canal froze, and I think that's finished it off, because it couldn't be used. Just after Christmas, we had a frost, and it sort of, and a lot of snow. That was the death knell of the canal. And the Southall Gasworks and Uxbridge Gasworks were both situated on the canal, and they got their coal by water. And also a lot of timber yards along the canal, which again they got the timber by water. And they survived until the 1960s, I suppose. It's slow, but if you've got a steady flow, it doesn't really matter that it's slow, but it is very slow compared with the road or rail.
Although the transporting of timber, coal, paper, flour and other industry has faded into history, the Grand Union has found a new lease of life for people enjoying day trips and holidays along its waterways. To complete our brief journey of the Upper Valley, I'm going to touch upon the agricultural industry, as it has also played a part in the industrial heritage of the park. For example, watercress farming. In the Cole Valley Regional Park, rivers such as the River Misbourne and the River Cole have chalk beds, and the purity of the chalk stream make it ideal for growing watercress. In 1820, William Bradbury relocated for West Hyde and established a watercress farm near the River Cole. It became a very successful industry and supplied watercress to the London market. Over the years, the watercress industry changed the shape of the rivers when carving channels to supply water to the watercress beds. Orchards and farming were also popular in the park, creating vast fields for crops and grazing. Although some of the farms and orchards were lost to gravel extraction, railway and road construction, there are still areas of farmland that offer pathways for ramblers. Over the years, the Upper Valley has been carved and reshaped by its industrial heritage. From the abundance of lakes created for the quarrying industry, the Grand Union Canal and the factories and mills that used it, and watercress farms that reshaped the rivers. They have all been part of shaping the landscape of the Cole Valley Regional Park. I hope you will join me for the next episode of the 50 Years of the Unofficial Countryside series, where we will explore the Middle Valley and some of its places that have been shaped through industry. Thank you. This episode has been supported by the Heritage Lottery Fund.